But to be here with Bob Spitz, a Lion legend, for about an hour's worth of conversation. Raleigh has very kindly written a lovely little bio blurb here, and I'm going to read it because it covers a lot of bases, and then I'm going to ask you a question about it, Bob, okay?
Sure.
New York Times best-selling author Bob Spitz, class of '71, is a Reading native, best known for his biographies of major cultural figures, including Reagan, An American Journey, the Beatles, the Biography, Dearie, The Remarkable Life of Julia Child, Barefoot in Babylon, the creation of the Woodstock Music Festival, and Dylan, a biography. In his early career, Bob managed recording artists Bruce Springsteen and Elton John. He is currently working on a book about the rock band Led Zeppelin. Spitz appears regularly in the New York Times Magazine, GQ, In Style, Esquire, and the Washington Post. Bob earned his undergraduate degree in history from Albright College and was later recognized with an honorary degree, Doctor of Humane Letters, by his alma mater. It's great to have you here, Bob.
John, it's a pleasure to be back.
If somebody had come into your classroom in 1971 and read that bio, who would have been most surprised? Your teachers, your fellow classmates, or you? And which part of it is the most surprising?
Actually, it would have been something that we all agreed on at that time. We all would have been surprised. I don't think my teachers knew what to make of me in those days. You know, I was young, like we were all young, but I was, I think, a little less directed than most of my fellow classmates. And oh, there's a picture of me. Yeah. And I think that, I think that if anybody had, I'll tell you a really funny story. I took a class with Dr. Reppert for my English 101. And the very first thing we had to do is he passed out blue books. And it was one of those, you know, write what you did over your summer vacation. And he picked one of those to read aloud. And he read it and he laughed at it and he tore it apart. And he said, class, what do we know about this person? And nobody, of course, dared to answer. And he said, what we know is this person will never be a writer. And of course, it was mine. So that explains everything, I think.
I think it does. I think it does.
I've never forgotten that.
Yeah. What a remarkable series of books. I noticed that almost every one of your subjects is someone who is already very, very famous. And so your job is not exactly to add to their notoriety. So how do you think about your distinctive contribution? And how do you, I guess, determine that there is a need or a space for that contribution?
Yeah, well, when I sit down to write about somebody, I look at two different things. Number one, is the person beloved? And number two, have they changed the culture? Because if they haven't changed the culture, it doesn't give me a lot to sink my teeth into. With the people I've written about, they had biographies written about them before. The Beatles had 800 books written about them when I sat down to write mine. And I had looked through a lot of them, and they were written by hagiographers or fanboys, or even some of the Beatles themselves. And that was really a lot of self-mythologizing. I felt that, well, Dylan hadn't had anything written about him. The Beatles had, Julia Child had one biography, and she and I were friendly. And Reagan, of course, had many. But I thought that there was nothing definitive written about them, something that was objective, where a person had done all their homework, had looked at every angle, had gone back and talked to every source that was available, and taken another look at this person and written about them without, in a very objective way. And I thought that that was my obligation to these people.
Great, great. Well, that's a wonderful calling. Have you yourself developed any theories about fame. Is fame a blessing or is it a curse?
Wow, I've seen it in so many different ways.
Yeah.
When I left Albright College, it's something I rarely talk about. The first job that I got was actually working for the Partridge Family. And I wrote several of their TV shows and was very close to the cast. Fame wrecked and ruined David Cassidy. He was a nice kid. You know, he was 21 years old, not much older than I am, and had a hard time with the kind of fame that was thrust his way. At the same time, 6 months later, I met Bruce Springsteen. Bruce, also my age, 21. We were both, you know, I was just out of school. Bruce was trying to make his way. And this was a person who knew exactly where to put fame and how to deal with it. It never hurt him in any way. And when it came down on him in a very big way, being on the cover of Time and Newsweek the very same week, Bruce really knew how to deal with everything and always has. So, and then of course there was Elton John, who was a lovely guy, really beautiful person to work for, and then fame kind of destroyed. So, you know, I've seen everything. I really have. My fame, I've never had to worry about.
But you've been so close to it. Has that, those early experiences in the world of rock and roll and show business, has that helped you to, as you interview people who've been close to greatness, or as you got to know Julia Child, has that been an empowering part of your own background?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, without it, I think that I wouldn't have had the, you know, the empathy to write about them and to understand what they had gone through. Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, Julia Child, there's another person who knew exactly what to do with her fame. It never impinged on her life. She put it in its proper place. Her entire family did. And yeah, some people are lucky. They're mature enough to deal with fame.
Right. And the fame, of course, came later on in her life. She was already in middle age.
Julia had not appeared on TV until she was 50 years old. So the great thing about her was that she reinvented herself in midlife. And to have the opportunity to watch somebody do that and to go relive it with them in a certain way was really a wonderful thing for me. I really loved every minute of it.
Yeah, yeah. Which is the bigger challenge, to present the life of somebody whom you admire and for whom you feel affection, or to present somebody who maybe you don't care about all that much? I know that you had a relationship with Julia Child, and that must have been a labor of love, but sometimes those labors of love can be tricky in terms of your point of view, your attitude. And I don't think you voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980, but yet you had to find a way to present him as well.
Yes, well, I can tell you most definitely. One of the things that I told people when I was talking about my Reagan biography is that I had never voted for a Republican in my entire life. Not because of who they are, but just because our policies are different. And so I approached Reagan as an empty vessel. I knew very little about him. I knew that when I was a college student, I didn't like his policies, but I was going to, as I said, approach him as an empty vessel and let his story fill me up, so that I got a way to really get under his skin, to understand him. And what I found was that this was a man who I came to admire greatly. I admired him for his love of his country, for the fact that he really put himself on the line for the country and felt that he was doing the right thing, even when I didn't feel he was doing the right thing. I thought he really worked hard as a young man in Hollywood who was a Roosevelt Republican, a Roosevelt Democrat, and really converted to conservatism. And I wanted to understand why he had done that. But even more to your point, the Led Zeppelin book that I'm working on right now.
Yeah.
I have 20,000 record albums. I don't have a single Led Zeppelin album. I was not a fan of theirs whatsoever. I had no interest in their music. When I was on the road with Bruce, they were at the height of their popularity.
Sure.
And the music didn't speak to me at all. And so when my editor said to me, "You've done the Beatles. I'd like you to write about the group that has sold almost as many albums as the Beatles, and is as popular in a way." I had no idea who he was talking about. And when he said Led Zeppelin, I almost fell off the chair. But he was adamant about it, and he was very generous in his advance. And so I said I would do it, and really came to understand their music, to understand who they were as young men, where they came from, how they lived their lives. The Led Zeppelin story is a very dark story. And as readers will find when I go out on the road with it next year, it's a Me Too story. And yet, as a biographer, you have to look beyond the surface and not just at one issue in their lives. And so, I came to understand their music. I came to actually listen to Stairway to Heaven without turning it off. A good thing. And so biographers have to do that. I think you have to come at everything objectively, and that's what I try to do.
Yeah, the French phrase "tout comprendre, tout pardonner."
Exactly.
If you understand it, then you have the capacity to forgive as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I haven't forgiven Ronald Reagan for everything yet, but I've certainly come to understand him. So.
I've read the Reagan book over the last 2 weeks, and the scene when after the assassination attempt, I thought he was an awfully good patient, and I thought that he had a wonderful sense of humor, and I find that endearing. He was about to be anesthetized, and he looked up at everybody there in the operating theater and said, "I hope you're all Republicans."
Right. And, John, I was so lucky to be able to find the anesthetist, the woman at the desk who saw the president of the United States stumble on his own into the reception area, the nurses in the room who were able to tell me what was going through his mind, what he talked about with them, even late at night when everybody had left the recovery room, and it was just him and the nurses. And so I was so fortunate to find these people and to have them open up. And yet at the same time, there was a guy like Ed Meese, who spent close to 100 hours with me trying to get me to understand not only who the president was, but why they chose the political path they did and the policies that they did. So it was really a wonder. I mean, if I could have told my history teachers at Albright that I was going to embark on a presidential biography, I think they would have keeled over. Really. Or they would have said, "Good God, no," really.
Yeah, I think our viewers would be fascinated to hear how you got access to so many of Reagan's intimates and were able to get them to open up and share the way they did.
Well, it actually started with a very fortuitous thing. Ken Duberstein was his fourth chief of staff, and he was actually his first liaison on the Hill. Ken Duberstein was my camp counselor, and I had not seen him in 40 years. And so I knocked on his door. I took a copy of my Beatles biography. I reintroduced myself, and he opened up the whole world. And dominoes fall. When you talk to somebody and you do a very good interview, then they will tell the next person, "This guy knows what he's talking about. You should talk to him, feel comfortable with him." My wife was astounded throughout the research of that book, because everybody I talked to was somebody who had been in politics with Reagan for almost 16 years, first as governor and then as president. And so I had to study everything that they had done. It was almost like taking a master's course once a week. I could tell you the difference between a cruise missile and an ICBM missile. I had to know all this so that when I talked to someone like Bud McFarlane, who was the head of national intelligence, he had to feel that he was telling me something that I could absorb. And I talked to McFarlane almost again for 150 hours and had to stay with him neck and neck. So it was a great experience. It was a learning experience for me, and I loved it.
Oh, it's clear that these books are the product of such diligent research. And I think before you have an oral history interview, the preparation just has to be so meticulous.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not asking the right questions.
Yeah, if you could have seen my office, and you're in my office tonight, I won't show you because I'm about to start a new book, and it's a mess. But with the Beatles, I had 50,000 pages of research for the Beatles when I worked on that book. With Reagan, I had maybe 250 binders filled with policy papers here. I was lucky because his wife, Nancy, allowed me, the first person, to be able to have access to the president's private papers. And these aren't the papers that were in the Reagan library. These were the ones that were in his private office in his files that he referred to all the time and annotated. And so it was really it was just, the research was, I loved every minute of it.
Wow, wow. And yeah, as a historian, I'm interested in these written sources as well. If you do the history of the American Revolution, you don't get to do many face-to-face interviews.
Right.
Reading Reagan's own writings, his yellow notepads, his 4x6 index cards, is there an extra part of his personality that comes across in that kind of source?
Yeah, it showed me what a regular guy he was.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, he really referred to magazines, to Americana all the time to get a sense of who the people were. And that was the bulk of his papers. I mean, he just went through magazines all the time to read about people and made all kinds of notations. And a lot of the policies came from reading those magazines. So Saturday Evening Post, he had almost every copy of it there.
Wow.
And that really tells you about who someone is and gives you an indication of what makes them as a person.
Mm-hmm. And of course, none of his college teachers would have predicted that he'd become president of the United States.
Oh, absolutely not. And I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time at his college, and was the first person to see all of his report cards. And I can say that he was a straight C and D student. He did not excel as a student in class, and that made me really feel kind of akin to him. I wasn't the greatest Albright student, and I think had you asked some of my professors where I would be right now, it wouldn't be here talking to you.
Yeah, I grew up in Ohio, so I'm a Midwesterner as well, and I really enjoyed the chapters on Illinois and this sort of makeshift hardscrabble peripatetic life that he led with his family early on.
Yeah, well, I really believe that there is one key thing to writing biographies, and that is you cannot know who someone is until you know where they come from. And I was lucky enough with Reagan to be able to spend a lot of time in the Midwest, in his hometown, in the towns in Iowa, where he was a broadcaster, a sports broadcaster for much of his career. And the same with the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles really taught me more than anything. Go see where people grew up. I lived in Liverpool for almost a year and a half when I was writing that book, and came to understand not just where the Beatles came from as individuals in their homes, but what that northern UK persona was like. And until you understand that, you do not understand who the Beatles are.
Right, right. The significance of local culture and the way it shapes someone and forms their horizons and their expectations.
Yes, very.
And the way in which the West Coast appealed to this young man's dreams and ambitions in the early 1930s.
Well, I was very fortunate because with Reagan, I had the Midwest and I had Hollywood and I had Washington, D.C. And, it really spanned not only the United States, but the entire 20th century. I mean, Reagan's life from, almost the dawn of the 20th century right until the end gave me a wonderful tableau to work with.
Yeah, it really was. And the subtitle, An American Journey, is just right, because you do have the sense of trajectory of movement and those places shaping him.
Yes, just as the Beatles gave me a sense of the 60s and the post-war UK, and even the post-war America, and the birth of the whole teenage
and the post-war Hamburg, Germany as well.
Exactly right. But also, in addition to that, it was also the birth of the teenager as a social force. It all came from that, and it was really fun to dig into that in that way.
When did you come alive to Julia Child? Did you actually watch The French Chef on PBS in the 60s, or was that a later discovery?
No, I actually did. When I actually watched Julia Child with my mother in Reading, and it was at the time when, to get a PBS station, you had to turn the little outer dial and
to UHF.
Exactly right. And my mom would sit with a yellow tablet on her lap and write all kinds of recipes and then give them a try. And my poor mom, and my mom is still around. She's 97 and still kicking. She would try her best to make those recipes, but she would make a steak based on what Julia said, and then on the weekend the Eagles would call and ask if they could use her steak for the game ball. I mean, my mom cooked things to death. It was, But
they might do better if they use that, I think.
Yes, maybe. Julia was a really interesting story. I was in Italy I guess I was about 40 years old, and I got a call I was on assignment for about 6 different magazines, and I got a call from a friend at the Italian Tourist Board in the States, and they said, we know that you're in Italy, and we know you have some extra time on your hand. Would you mind being an escort for an older woman? And I said, buddy, I don't do that kind of work. And they said, it's Julia Child. And I said, I'll be right over. Julia was in Italy, and she was 80 years old at the time, and she was doing a kind of circuit of eating Italian food. And her legs were not well, her legs weren't good, and she needed a young arm to hold on to. And so for about 3 or 4 weeks, I did nothing but eat and talk to Julia Child, 3 meals a day. It was fantastic, and we became very good friends.
Oh, and that sort of opened up her as a topic. I know you and I have talked a little bit about the earlier biography and the ways in which that just didn't adequately capture who she was.
Right. Julia had said to me, I had asked her if I could write her biography, and she said that she was involved with somebody else. And then she called me back and she said, I really need you to consider doing it because you can't smell the food on the page of this other biography. And I knew exactly what she meant. But by the time I was ready by the time she was ready, I was already working on the Beatles, and Julia passed away while I was working on that. So I didn't get into her archives until after she had already gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're talking a lot about the process that a writer undergoes. maybe talk a little bit more in detail about that. I know your fellow alums are wondering, how do you turn out one 800-page volume after another? There must be discipline. There must be some sort of method.
Did my editor ask you to ask me that question? I
No.
think so. You know, it's I love doing it. I mean, I don't even know how to say it. I love researching when I'm researching, and I love writing when I'm writing. And I love putting it all together. And if you've done your work, if you've done your homework, if you've done all your research, it all comes alive. I don't even remember the 5 years I worked on Julia Child, or the 8.5 years I worked on the Beatles, or the 5 years on Reagan. It feels to me as if those books wrote themselves. I walk into a room, and when I come out, the book is finished. It's beyond me how it happens. I get involved with the story. I love the story. I can't wait to see what happens. And then I realize I'm telling someone's story who is a really important person, and that I'm going to have an audience that really cares about people. And so I feel I have an obligation to do the work and to make them come alive on the page, and that's keeps me there. I enjoy it. I enjoy it. And when I'm not writing, like right now, my wife would like to hire a babysitter because I get very restless. I'm very restless.
No. In your process, does the research precede any writing, or are you writing and researching at the same time?
Yeah, I don't write a word until all the research is finished.
Okay.
I want to know that there's not going to be any emergency where I have to get up and run and fill something in that I haven't done. And that's the beauty of being able to complete these long-winded manuscripts, of sitting down and knowing it's all right there. It's on my shelves. It's in the computer, and all I have to do is tell the story, and that's what I really enjoy doing. So all the research comes first. When I'm researching, I'd rather be writing, and when I'm writing, I'd rather be researching. So what can you do?
Yeah. No, but I think that kind of preparation really does empower you as a writer.
Yeah, and every writer. My wife is also a very well-known nonfiction writer, and we talk about our process all the time, how we're going to put it together, and we both have completely different processes. Completely.
Oh, okay.
Every time I try to convince her that mine is the right one, yeah, it doesn't work.
Do you read each other's work in its early stages?
Every day. And I don't know if you can see this, but we live in a New York City apartment. Space is very rare. And so my wife is she writes in the same room right behind me. And we are back, this chair is her chair, and that computer is her computer. I'm talking into mine now. And so we work back to back. It's great. I have a built-in thesaurus, Becky, synonym for, it's wonderful. On the other hand, it took a couple years until she could get me not to talk to my computer screen, not to eat peanuts while I was working. There are all kinds of concessions that you have to make. She's a longtime newspaper woman. And so she was used to a press room, but with me, it's a little different.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think sometimes if you're in a great reading room of a big library, it's easier to focus knowing that there are other scholars around you poring over volumes themselves.
Yes, when I worked in the Reagan Library, there were 4 or 5 other scholars there, and actually some men who I knew and who I respected. And so I was on my best behavior. Had my wife seen me there, she wouldn't have known it was the same guy. So what you're saying is absolutely true. Yeah.
No, no. Are there other biographers who you particularly admire?
Oh, good God. I mean, the list is long and it grows all the time. And there are people that I'm in contact with all the time. I mean, Robert Caro is my absolute idol. I've talked to him often. Neil Gabler, whose biography of Teddy Kennedy just came out, and he
Right.
was Walter Winchell's biographer. We talk all the time. There's another guy named Jonathan Eig, who right now is working on a biography of Martin Luther King that will change the way we see Reverend King, and has access to papers no one has ever seen before. I spoke to him for about an hour today. So we all kind of know each other. It's a small fraternity. We all know what we do, and we're really odd people. We speak a language that nobody else speaks, just like in any other profession. But these are all people who I admire greatly and lean on whenever I really need some help in my writing.
Right. I know that Ron Chernow didn't expect his biography of Hamilton to be turned into a Broadway musical.
Right.
The Beatles already have a pretty good songbook. Any of your books destined for the Broadway stage once Broadway reopens?
Not Broadway stage, but film, yes, and that's in the works now more than I thought. Two of my friends made RBG about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They directed it, and my wife and I took them out to lunch and said, we probably figure you're looking for another subject. And they said, we've seen 60 people and they all have subjects for us and none of them interests us. And so we had written a proposal for a film documentary based on my Julia Child biography. They took it, they called us the next morning and they said, that's it, that's our next film. It's finished. Ron Howard and my wife and I produced it. And Sony Classics Pictures is releasing it to theaters if there are ever theaters again, who knows? Mm-hmm. And CNN has bought the broadcasting rights. So that film is happening, that's in the works. There's also a series based on my Reagan book that is in the works right now. And so things are always interesting. I mean, every writer who writes a biography hopes that it will live on in a different form in some way.
In other forms, that's right, and change the perception of the central figure.
Yes, and I think the Julia Child documentary, I think, it was based on my book, but my book is only a blueprint. And so that's the way I feel about film. Books are just a blueprint, and the directors found something completely different. It'll be a really interesting story. It's also, by the way, it's been my book's been under option for a Broadway show for 6 years, and they've found an actress, and they're going to have a table reading for it the end of January. So. It's going to be a one-woman show on Broadway, and we're really excited.
I think that could absolutely work. Will the documentary be in documentary style with film footage and photographs and that sort of thing, or there won't be Meryl Streep won't be brought in to impersonate Julia Child?
It's a straightforward documentary. In fact, Betsy West, who was one of the directors of the film, was a 60 Minutes director for almost 25 years. So she's a really straightforward journalist.
Yeah. And of course, there are all those photographs that Julia's husband took. So it's there's lots of visual.
Yes, Julia did a lot of interviews. There was a lot of footage to choose from, so it'll be fun.
Great. Yeah, great. Oh, we're going to look forward to that.
Yeah.
when it's interesting writing a biography of 20th century figures. You've lived through a chunk of the 20th century yourself, as have I. Did you find yourself thinking about Ronald Reagan when you were in your 20s? Were you paying attention to him?
Oh yes.
Mhm.
Oh yes. I was part of several demonstrations at Albright against the Reagan. Oh, was I at Albright? No, I wasn't. I
No,
was
you
in the
graduated by.
yeah.
I'm sure
71.
you demonstrated against Nixon.
Oh, I did. I did. I was part of the library sit-ins, of course. But no, I was I did demonstrate against Reagan. Books are all the books that I write always intrude on my life, and
Mhm.
my life intrudes on the books. In fact, with the Beatles biography, I realized very early on in the writing of it that I was writing the story of my life.
Hmm.
The Beatles were a story of all of our lives and how life changed for all of us during that time, not just culturally, but politically, in so many different ways, style, fashion, um, and um, I so that was really what made me sit with that book for so long. It was an 8.5 year project. It was very long and hard. And the Reagan book too. It made me re-examine. It made me re-examine my politics and understand why I felt the way I did about my liberal politics as opposed to Reagan's conservative politics, and where they intersected. And I think that's obvious in the reading of that book. You can see me processing who he was through his politics. And it was because I was trying to understand my own in so many ways.
Right, but it's not an intrusive form of self-processing. I think you're very much in the background. You're very much an authorial voice rather than voicing your own opinion or your own angle. So it's
Yeah,
an
I'll tell you.
indirect self-revelation.
Yeah, I'll tell you a really interesting story about that. After I wrote my Dylan biography, it got a review on the front page of the Washington Post book world by Greil Marcus, who I really respected as a rock writer. And he began it this way. He said, "This is a fascinating book by an author who understands this subject inside and out. And this is an obnoxious book." And I, of course, dismissed him as a complete asshole and put the review away. And then 2 years later, I pulled it out and I looked at my Dylan biography and I realized that there was too much of me in it. I was so impressed with my voice and getting the reader to know that I had a unique voice that it intruded everywhere on that book. If I could have that book over again, I would kill to rewrite it. But that taught me so much, so that when I wrote the Beatles, I knew how to pull myself out of that story and be an objective narrator, just kind of leading you through it. And it changed the way I wrote. So every once in a while, you need a good smack in the head like that.
Yeah, that does sound like really a useful perspective.
Dr. Repert
And the Reagan book remarkably has been favorably reviewed by liberals and conservatives. I mean, I was able to read it and I found it absolutely fascinating. I haven't changed my politics, but
yeah, no, and shockingly so. I'll tell you that my Republican friends, and I do have Republican friends, both of them told me that they thought I had done a good job. So very proud of that. No, listen, I knew that coming into that if you knew what my politics were in writing that book, that I would have failed from the very beginning. So it was very important for me not to let the reader know where my politics fell. And that allowed me to be objective and look at this man in a really interesting way. And I hope that I did capture him for someone like you who was a Democrat that might not have read a book about Ronald Reagan. Yeah.
Several of the alums would love you to reminisce a little bit about your Albright days. Were there particular teachers or particular mentors that you had in some context?
Yeah. Listen, I had there was a great history department when I was there. I thought they were fantastic, and I learned a lot from them, Dr. Kessler and people like that. But also, I haven't been very kind to Dr. Reppert when I tell little stories about him, but that man was a true Albright intellectual. He was a brilliant guy. He was very opinionated, but he came and played pool with us. He bowled with us. He was sharp with us. If he didn't like the direction that you were going in, he told you in no uncertain terms. And as part of the growing up phase of college, having that kind of influence in your college days is a wonderful thing. It's more than just having a great professor, or it's somebody who really talks to you as a person and guides you along. Yeah, I was really fortunate. I love the fact that the school was so small. There were people, several of my professors, we'd have get-togethers in their homes in the evening over a glass of wine. Oh, I'm not supposed to say that, right? Yeah. We weren't supposed to have wine. It wasn't wine, but we'd have seminars in their homes afterwards, and it was fantastic. It was a great experience. I wouldn't have traded it for anything.
Yeah. Well, we still try to be that way. Minus the alcohol in our homes, but
yes, of course, sure.
But the closeness is there. Yeah. This has been a real challenge this past year with so much going remote and change to the configuration of the semester and everything like that. But we've made it through half the year. So
yeah, I sure wouldn't have wanted to be a college student with a pandemic. It's part of the college experience was the social aspect of it. And at Albright, getting to know almost all your fellow students because of the smallness of the classes was one of the most attractive things. That I still have very good friendships, and I hope some of them have checked in tonight. People that I stayed in touch with, and it's really it was a great experience for me. Yeah.
Speaking of friends in small rooms, another of the viewers wonders how you and your wife working intensely on your own projects in that small room. What do you do to keep the marriage happy and healthy and delightful? Is the work itself a source of nourishment?
Yeah, it's one of the easiest things we have. I mean, we live and breathe our books all the time, and we both love what we do, not just the writing and the research, but also the commercial aspect, selling the books, meeting people on the road, having films made. We talk about it all the time. We have one rule: we do not talk about it in the bedroom. Before we go to bed, we never mention our work. But I mean, I'm really fortunate. My wife is the best editor I've ever had. She is brutal. She is a strict grammarian. I can't get anything past her. She has the best bullshit detector I have ever met. There isn't a cliche I can sneak past that woman. And so I really value her reading my stuff. And I'm hard on her as well. I mean, we both respect each other's contribution to our work. And I love the fact that she's sitting behind me. We do not believe in writer's block. We don't feel there's such thing. You sit down and you do your work. And if it doesn't come at the moment, get up and clear your head and think about it and then sit down and write again or talk it out. And there's many times during the day when I'll tap my wife on the shoulder and say, look, this sentence there's something wrong here. It doesn't ring true. Where am I making a mistake with it? And she's always got the answer, and I do the same for her. Yeah, it's a great thing. Well, I love having her sitting there. She'd like her own office, by the way.
Have you improved as a writer, do you think?
Oh, John, I improve every day. Really, I'm convinced. I learn something about my work every day. And when I started writing, it was very hard for me. I wasn't trained as a writer. I was a musician, and I really thought working with Bruce and Elton that it was going to be music for me for the rest of my life. But I got the opportunity to write early, and it would take me, if I got an article that was 750 words, it might take me a week and a half to write it. And I would have to pull an all-nighter to get it in on time. I write 750 words in the morning these days. I've really learned how to write, to trust myself, not to think about impressing anybody, but to sit down and tell a story, use my own voice. And I think that's, I talked a lot with John Meacham after I wrote the Reagan biography. And he said, the book was almost like someone talking to me, telling me the story, sitting by the campfire and rolling it out. He said, that's what I found so unique about your book. And that's what I've learned how to do more than anything. But I'm learning every day. Every day I sit down, just relax, tell the story, find a different way, get rid of those adverbs, Yeah.
Yeah.
My license plate.
It's true. The prose just flows on the page. It's such a compellingly readable approach that you've taken.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Do you have any advice for young aspiring writers? Go off and make rock music?
No, make sure there's somebody in your life with a big bank account. Really, I'm really fortunate. I'm being a little facetious. I make a very good living as a writer and always have. But writing is it takes, you can get $1 million advance for a book, but the book takes 5 years to write. And you're responsible for all the expenses for the research. So when you think about it, first they take off all that for taxes. Your agent takes a 20% cut. Your research takes part of it. And then 5 years goes by. What's left? $1 million goes very fast.
Yeah.
So, anything else that people have been asking?
Vince is wondering if you could interview anyone whom you haven't already interviewed, who would it be?
Wow, what a question. Yeah, it's, I've been really fortunate. I mean, when I got to spend time with Paul McCartney, I thought that was it, wow. And it was in his studio, and he knew I was a musician, and he had all the instruments there from the Beatles albums. And he started to play, and he looked at me, and he went like this. He nodded at the guitar. And I realized that Paul McCartney was nodding me into a little jam with him. That was really like the pinnacle for me. No, I think that if for a while I really thought that I was going to be Jimmy Carter's biographer, and I really, really wanted to do that, but our schedules just didn't jibe. And for a short period of time, I was George Steinbrenner's biographer. And that was a book that I had always wanted to write. I felt that he had changed the culture in a very big way. He defined baseball. There was a lot of controversy swirling around his story, and a lot that people didn't know about him. He went to Williams College and played the piano for Stephen Sondheim. I mean, go figure. And And I started working with him on it and realized within 2 weeks that something was wrong with Mr. Steinbrenner. And he lapsed into dementia very quickly, and I had to turn that project aside. But I'm still thinking of doing that book at a certain point.
Mhm.
You know, I never know who will come around the next corner. I never thought that Ronald Reagan would come around the corner, or that Led Zeppelin would come around the corner. And that's one of the wonderful things about what I do. My life takes me in so many different directions. It's always fascinating.
And still filled with surprises.
Yeah, not
But
only, and I was just going to say, not only with the people that I'm writing about, but all the people whose lives intersected with them. I've met some hundreds of fascinating people who've done really wonderful stuff.
I would love to see a fresh biography of Jimmy Carter. I think he's one of the late 20th century presidents who doesn't get all the credit that he perhaps deserves.
Yeah, there's one in the works right now, and it's going to be a doozy. I'm sure of it.
Okay.
So, I always wanted to write a biography of Walt Disney, but my friend Neil Gabler wrote that, and
Right.
so
Right.
you miss some and you get some. That's the way it goes.
Yeah. And you're happy with the Led Zeppelin story, even though it's a dark one?
Yes, I knew it was dark going in. I also felt that the rock music business has gotten almost a free pass in the Me Too era.
Yeah.
And I did not want to, I didn't want to let them off the hook, and yet I didn't want to bring the house down. So I found a way to tell that story and to let the readers know exactly how difficult and what a dark story it was. At the same time, finding a way to tell a story about these four guys who changed the way we listen to music and had a really difficult time relating to one another. It's a fabulous story. I'm really pleased with it. I'm really glad that I was a part of it and that I didn't turn it away when it was offered to me. And
Yeah,
the next one's.
You're so good at sensing those relationships between small groups of people with different personalities, different agenda, and the way in which they intersect and touch each other and change each other. It's
yeah, it's fascinating. I will tell you, because it's going to be announced next week, that I am going to be the Rolling Stones biographer.
I was thinking of if you're talking about groups that are around at the same time as the Beatles and have recorded as many albums.
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
That's the next project, and it's a long and hard one because the Beatles and Led Zeppelin were together each 10 years.
Right.
The Stones is a 60-year story. So I'm going to have my work cut out for me.
That's longer than Reagan's film career.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. One of our viewers wonders about other presidents who might be written about. Who's going to be able to write a biography of Donald Trump, do you think?
Not me. That's not a story I'd want to write. And that's going to be a very difficult story for a biographer, because if you want to remain objective in a story like that, you'll have your hands filled and your work cut out for you. I will tell you that I spent a week and a half with Donald Trump, just me and him. Back when Mar-a-Lago opened, In Style sent me to do a story on the opening of Mar-a-Lago. And so I lived there for about a week and a half. And it was just he and his wife, it was Marla Maples at the time, and me. Mm-hmm. And I got to spend about 10 days, all day with him. It's something I wouldn't want to revisit right now. Just the way, yeah. I don't think we should delve into that too much.
No, let's not. Yeah. Lots of excitement about the Rolling Stones as a subject for biography. Yeah. One person has an early question. That first step from from Albright College to writing for the Partridge Family. How did that happen for you?
When I left Albright with a history degree, I had no idea what to do with my life. I had originally thought that I would go into the pre-med program, and I knew within 3 weeks that wasn't for me. I loved the history, but my parents thought that I hadn't thought about every angle, and they put me on a Beaver bus to New York to visit my uncle who lived there, who was in the entertainment business. And they said, look, you've been playing music all your life since you were, 8 years old. Go to New York and maybe look around and see what you come up with. And a person there was very kind to me, took me under his wing and got me a job in the music business and sent me to the man who was producing the Partridge Family. And about 6 months later, I was in the office with two of the guys who were writing the music for the show. I was there handling the publishing and working on screenplays for them. And we had a knock at the door. It was about 8 o'clock at night. And some young kid was there with his guitar in his hand, wondering if he could have his music heard. And we didn't know how he got in the building. I mean, it was after hours. We were on the 12th floor. He had found his way up and knocked on our door. And he sat down and played about a song and a half. And my two friends and I looked at each other and we realized that we were in the midst of something very special. That was Bruce Springsteen. And the three of us went out for a hamburger about 10 o'clock that night, my two partners and me. And we quit our jobs the next morning.
Wow.
We realized that something, you don't look a gift horse like this in the mouth. You make a quick decision and you go. And we had a contract for Bruce at Columbia Records with John Hammond, who is my mentor and a legend in his own right, within 5 days. And that's how you get from Albright into the music business. It was that easy.
A giant leap for mankind.
Yeah, really.
Oh,
I mean, into the unknown, completely into the unknown. I love being part of the Albright family. I always loved the fact that it was a smaller school and I felt close to everybody there. And in the intervening years, I've felt even closer to it. Thanks very much for having me. And it was great to see everybody.